In recent years, the term debt has sunk into the minds of every individual in the world. This has occurred relatively due to numerous countries declaring bankruptcy, due to improper fiscal policy. Whether that is through having too much debt that they can't pay back, or due to a sudden economic crisis that has indeed happened in 2020. In Southeast Asia, countries that are very much close to the nation of China are beckoned with such troubles. After all, it has been cited numerous times by Western media and even the government themselves to, well, not ask for too many loans from Asia's biggest economy. For one nation, however, as the title suggests, Malaysia is rather experiencing a relatively high debt burden, as some may claim. This is measured by the term debt to GDP, a measurement used by economists to determine how much debt a country holds relative to its gross domestic product, another key indicator that is known for being somewhat representative of the entire economy. Thus, debt to GDP in short is basically a measurement of a country having more debt than its entire economy. But back to the main topic, Malaysia's debt to GDP, as reported by the Ministry of Finance, stands at around 60%, which is recorded by the end of the half of 2022. This figure, however, although touted by numerous groups as a quote-unquote concerning, is in fact actually low. By a set of standards, that is. If we compare it to other nations around Southeast Asia, Malaysia is rather competitive. Thailand and the Philippines have close to 62% of debt to GDP, while Indonesia has 40%, making, of course, Indonesia quite an outlier in the region. But these countries may still not show us the full picture. Malaysia is an upper-middle-income economy, not unlike the other countries in Southeast Asia. So if we compare it to a more developed nation, there are already too many of us to know that Malaysia's overall debt to GDP is very low. This, however, still does not show us the full picture of what Malaysia's overall debt burdens look like. We may likely need more figures around here, but for simplicity's sake, we can check out the debt service ratio of the government. As provided again by the Ministry of Finance, it is expected to be around 18%, as projected by the end of 2022. This means that for every ringgit collected in revenue by the government, 18% of such will be serviced to pay down debt interests. Now, this figure is actually quite concerning, because unlike numerous countries that have a high debt figure, like say the United States and Japan, Malaysia has actually a higher debt service ratio when we use the figure of 18%. This means that any more form of loans, or an increase of its debt levels, would be difficult, unless, of course, the government finds a way to increase its revenue, and be able to pay down any higher debt interest payments. Why has it come to this, though? How does Malaysia, which has a far lower debt to GDP ratio compared to these, and quite a lot of other developed nations, can't service its debt any more than it already has? This might be why, as of the year 2021, we have seen its overall debt to GDP go down already, a presumed push by the government as handling of debt may indeed need to come down. Whether this is an issue, however, will be discussed later on. But to answer the first question, it is because there is still little income coming into the government compared to other developed nations. Where does this revenue or income come from? It derives it from numerous parts of the entire economy. It could be from taxes, from individual or corporate. It could come from non-tax sources, which is by many regards a very long list, but some of which are known to be government operations such as bonds. If you are not aware of, is a fixed income investment, where an individual may purchase from the government or sometimes from a corporation and will be paid back with interests. They can also come from profits of the state-owned enterprises. This has in many ways have helped push the entire economy of Malaysia and its government revenues. After all, Malaysia has one of the strongest profit-generating schemes when it comes to government-owned companies, which are locally known as the Petronas Nasional Berhad, a company that produces billions to tens of billions of dollars worth of income each and every year. And they are even joined by many more out there. Lastly, do not miss out on one of the most important factors. Malaysia's current account balance has also played a role, not just for today, but for the last 2 decades. The nation's account balance has always seen a strong surplus, even at one time recording close to 130 billion ringgit, and in 2021 recorded 58 billion ringgit in surplus. This has in many ways also impacts the overall ability of the government to repay its debt. But wait, something is kind of missing. Why can't the government service such debt, if it has all these instruments at play? Well, it might be due to the fact that Malaysia has a relatively small tax revenue compared to both developed nations and its surrounding Southeast Asia. It is recorded to be just around 11%, a very small figure that even the Philippines triumphs upon, as the archipelago nation has seen its tax to GDP ratio somewhere at 17%. But why? Why is Malaysia's tax revenue very small? Well, as you may have already guessed, tax revenue is influenced by factors such as income tax rate, corporate tax rate, value-added tax, and so on. These affect the overall tax revenue of the government, and tax revenue is a key driver of revenue for the government. The tax rate of Malaysia, both on individual and corporate, is on average lower than in developed nations. At the same time, the goods and service tax rate, or GST for short, is non-existent as of 2018. GST is even amongst the biggest in generating tax revenue. Previously, when it was still indicted into law, it was generating around 300 billion ringgit every year, a huge sum, considering that it is only 6%. But we can stop with all these numbers and figures already, as it might be too much of a burden already. Although this can already tell us a lot about the country's overall ability to repay its debt. Yes, indeed, it might be at a certain threshold that the government should not exceed, but it does not mean the country is, as some noted, on the verge of bankruptcy. If the government wants to, they can easily use fiscal and monetary policies to increase government revenues, as easy as it is, as we can relate to the overall tax revenue. 300 billion ringgit a year may even be an understatement already, as that figure was 5 years back, and if the government also wants to, it can easily hike more than 6%. This will, after then, can easily pay down any incoming and previous debt burdens, which will more than likely already help Malaysia's economy stronger. Lastly, we may not want to miss out on the fact that Malaysia's overall debt burden is actually domestic debt, meaning that it is the majority, or in fact all of it actually comes from debt inside the economy. From an economics perspective, they tend to call it owing to ourselves, and not to others. The Ministry of Finance has shown that as of the end of 2021, out of the total government debt, offshore or international borrowings account for no more than 5%, whereas the rest is just domestic debt, mostly coming from government securities and investment issues. This can already tell us a lot again, as external debt is involved with numerous problems. But as recorded, it is negligent to the entire economy of Malaysia. The only issue that we can truly see in Malaysia's overall fiscal and monetary standpoint is how able the government can still manage without hiking tax rates or needing to leverage some other unnecessary means. If they can manage without any of such, then it will ultimately help both the government and the people, as they will not have to take any more unnecessary taxes. After all, we may too produce our opinion to say that Malaysia is now capable of doing so, as we're now seeing the world opening up. The past economic crisis is now well already in the past, and ultimately the other profit-generating schemes that have disappeared during the pandemic will now likely help produce more government revenues for the nation of Malaysia. While inflation could also play an important role in all of these, as it has relatively done so throughout the world, and in some cases devastated numerous developing nations. We will try to leave that for another video. Anyway, what do you think?